Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
The creative brief is probably the most important strategic document in all of marketing. And yet, hardly any of us have ever trained on it. In this episode, we sat down with Pieter-Paul and Matt Davies from BetterBriefs to talk about what we can learn about how to make better briefs, how to evaluate ideas better, and how we can make a bigger commercial impact. This episode's been sponsored by Quadical, fractional marketing leadership using evidence-based marketing practices. That's quadical.com.
Welcome to the Sleeping Barber Podcast, a place for business leaders to get the best and most credible information on marketing, strategy, and innovation. Your hosts, Marc, Binkley, and Vassilis Douros, share their experiences as they gather insights from the world's leading experts. Now, on with the show. Well, welcome to the Sleeping Barber. This episode is super exciting. We've got a couple of people, again, from the future for us.
That's right.
Being in Canada. You guys, it's Thursday or Wednesday. I don't even know what day it is here. Tuesday for us, Wednesday for you. We've got Pieter-Paul van Weiler and then Matt Davies from the BetterBriefs organization. I keep thinking about it as a project because I always think about the paper you produced. We're super excited to have you guys here. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Yeah. There's a lot that we'll get into about this. And I mentioned the BetterBriefs project, which is one of the first things that I had seen from you and the work you had done. You've since done this Better Ideas project. We all know that creative is super important. And oftentimes, the one stat I use all the time from you guys, which we'll talk more about, is marketers, myself included, think I'm amazing at writing a brief. Agency partners don't agree so much. So we'll talk a lot about that and how we get to improving that, but also improving making better ideas. So just super excited to have you here and welcome to the show. To start, maybe we could just start with your backgrounds. Like, how did you get, there isn't really a job description out there for most people thinking about, what do I want to do when I grow up? And it's not usually about writing briefs.
Write better briefs.
Yeah, but I want to know, what's the background that got you into this position and founding a company that does focus on this?
Yeah, so both Matt and I have a background as agency strategists, which is this nice niche profession in agencies where you're the first person to actually take the brief from a brand and try to make sense of it for creative teams. And we've been doing that all our life, and that's basically the only profession we've had until we started BetterBriefs. And in that profession, I guess wherever we went, wherever we worked, I've got a funny accent because I'm originally from Holland. Matt's got a funny accent because he's originally from Australia.
G'day, everyone.
There you go. We worked in many different places and we worked in many different categories. And wherever we went, a mixture of quality briefs landed on our desk. And that starts to add up, especially when you're in the business 20 years or so. You start to wonder, why is this happening? Why is this happening in every category, everywhere? Why even have some Effie award-winning work? Why has that started even with a poor brief? What is going on here? So that starts to become a return. It started to become a returning question in conversation between Matt and myself. We worked together for a while at the same agency in Melbourne, and we started to look into the matter. We went beyond the daily cursing of, here's another bad brief. But when we started to look into the matter, it turned out that such an important document, when you think about it, this is a super important document, right? That goes from a brand to an agency. You might argue it is the most important document that exchanges hands. And we quickly discovered that hardly any research had been done on this really important document. Now, as strategists, you're always curious. You always want to know what's going on. You're always asking why to everything, everywhere, all the time. So we started to look into the matter more, and we reached out to some friends, a research agency called Flood & Partners, and we got a survey up, and we basically filled this knowledge gap. We got over 1,700 respondents to take a survey. Yeah. And all of a sudden, we're not researchers, right? We were just curious, and we wanted to fill this gap. And all of a sudden, we were the ones that had the largest and only global study into marketing briefs. And that was the start of BetterBriefs.
That's wild.
We find briefs, by the way, and get out of agency land.
And briefs, you say that briefs are niche, and they're actually the pointy end of a lot of thinking. And that's what excites us about them. It's all the marketing strategy that a brand has been working through, distilled into a 1 or 2 page document that agencies take and use to feed into the creative process. So they are so important, to Pieter-Paul's point. And we get to see, as strategists through briefs, we get to see the ambition of a lot of our clients. What do their strategies look like? What does success look like for them as an organization? What insights are they working through to? What problems are they looking to overcome? So for us, that is it's the pointy end. Right, it's the bit where the commercial nature of a business and their desire to have some kind of return on their marketing investment, the rubber hits the road at that point. And so for us, it's naturally a place, and hence BetterBriefs became the name. If we got to BetterBriefs, we could make sure that we're impacting businesses in the right way, and it sort of led to us thinking about another part of the process, another area where strategists are naturally involved within that process, and that's ideas. We deal and sit with ideas in their infancy from very, very early doors within agencies, right? It's our job to nurture the right ones along with the creatives and the account management and everyone through that agency, and get the right ones in front of clients, the ones that we think are going to deliver to that brief that's been set. So the Better Ideas project came about as a natural extension of BetterBriefs, right? It is not the brief that sees the light of day. It is the creative work that drives effectiveness. So those two things combined, a better input and a better output, will hopefully have a really positive effect on any organization that we work with.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah. Go ahead, V.
Yeah, I was just, it's funny as you were talking about this, and Pieter-Paul, I completely agree with you. And it's probably like the brief being one of the most important artifacts that exchanges hands between, say, a client and an agency. I'm sure, like in both of your respective experiences, that you've seen, it almost becomes like a window into the client in some capacity. So the structure or the way the brief is put together, the way they're putting their thoughts on paper, once you receive that without maybe a more formal structure like you guys have already gone ahead and outlined, it probably gives you an idea. It's like, oh boy, this is going to be a slog, or it's like, no, we're in a good spot. We'll be able to get this moving quickly. Is that the case, or have you been proved wrong sometimes where some of these like terrible briefs actually turn out being okay, or the outcome being better?
No, I like where you're going. So I think there's some clear signals when briefs are not as good as they can be. So if a 10 or 20 page brief lands on your desk, right. that is not a summary of all the strategic thinking a brand has been doing.
Right.
That's just a dumping ground, right? Mm-hmm. The heart of the brief should be 1 or 2 pages. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be more than that. The appendix can be extensive. Additional information can be extensive. Yeah. But the series of core decisions that brands need to make to brief agencies should be short, should be brief. That's what the word brief from Latin has meant for thousands of years. Right. Here's another clue when that indicates that you might be receiving a poor brief. When the objective section or the picture of success or whatever it's called in a specific brief is unclear, that's also a sign of a very poor brief. Because if you can't tell your agency what you're trying to achieve in the attitudes of your target audience,
right?
How then can you start the ideation process?
Yeah.
Agencies, we argue, right? We go quite hard with our clients. We say businesses invest in marketing to drive better business results.
Right.
And Matt and I are quite passionate that creativity needs to deliver commercial results. Yeah. So when it comes down to the picture of success in a brief, you need to be clear on what at the end of the comms activity, what it is that you want to achieve commercially. Mm-hmm. You need to understand that as an agency. Mm-hmm. And what needs to happen from a behavioral perspective that will deliver the commercial results, and what then needs to happen to influence the behavior from an attitudinal perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
Those three elements are absolutely crucial when you're painting a picture of success for your agency, and without, they can't start. So that's another clue. Any other clues, Matt, for Paul briefs?
Who's writing them? Who's involved? We're fortunate that we work with some pretty amazing clients who are good at what they do. Their ambition in working with us is to get a little bit better at what they do. The likes of, LinkedIn and AT&T and Lego and some amazing brands across the world, and they want to elevate the standard of their brief writing to take it to another level. But they're already decent, right? There's brands that don't call us who want to put their head in the sand and don't want to recognize the problem. And we would have seen from some of that research that there is a big problem. But who's writing the brief? At some organizations, you're not allowed to touch a brief until you're 7 years in.
Oh, wow.
And you've shadowed brief writers, and you've shadowed processes to a point where you understand what is expected of a brief. There are some organizations that let briefs pass through really easily because they feel like they can catch any misdirection at the idea stage. Again, a really expensive way to use the creative process, right? You're letting your agency kind of work out the strategy for you instead of putting clear direction in. And so a brief that isn't treated like a contract, internally with stakeholders and externally with your agency partners, creative agency, media agency, design agency, whatever it is a brief that is designed to fail. It doesn't have the alignment that's required, and the level of clarity and craft that is required to make sure that we are from day dot through to the point of measuring the impact of that brief and the creative work. People won't be aligned.
So there's the way I kind of hear what you're saying. I mean, coming back to that quote of the 80% of the brief writers think they're amazing. Only 10% of the agencies agree. A lot of those factors are the factors really that drive that wedge, probably that gap between them. Is that fair?
Well, who's right in that finding? Is it the marketeers? Is it the agencies?
Right.
We like to argue that there's a lack of alignment between the two. They're sitting on different planets, literally, on what the definition of a good brief is. And both parties, both marketeers and agencies, need to do better there. So if you're a marketeer, you need to check in with your agency. Hey, is everybody clear? Truly.
Yeah.
Speak up if something isn't clear. Are you clear on the picture of success? Are you clear on the target audience that I'm giving you? Is my brief single-minded enough? Am I giving you a springboard to start and ignite your creative thinking? Because that's what a brief is, right? It's a springboard to guide the agency, to set them up for success. Yeah. And also agencies, and we've been guilty of this, agencies accept poor briefs way too easily. Let's take this brief and we'll figure it out at the agency.
Let's just get it going,
Sometimes I was told, Pieter-Paul, stop asking questions. We want to come across as an agency that is nice to work with. You're asking so many questions that we're coming across as confrontational.
Yeah.
That's not what the questions are about. The questions were about clarification to make sure that a larger group of people that comes after the strategic phase in an agency don't get affected by a poor brief, because then everybody is confused.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like conflict, like avoidance of conflict is probably another part of the reasons that people just get poor briefs and poor work and bad ideas, because they're not willing to challenge the things that are on the piece of paper sometimes.
The best way to have a conversation about a brief or about creativity is when there's not a brief on the table, when there's not an idea on the table.
Right.
And that's when we see the best results. And the relationships that we formed with clients when we were working at agencies, they were always long-term relationships with a clear creative ambition, where we could say, hey, what does your brief template and structure look like? Great. Can we work with that? Can we let you in on what happens in the agency when we receive your brief, the type of information we need from you, and how we use that to get to creativity? Because creativity isn't something that just arrives in the shower, as we all know. It's an iterative process where lots of people have an impact and a say along the way. So communicating with each other, understanding what each other needs to do their job in the right way is really important. And that's much easier when there isn't a screaming deadline, when there isn't a brief that has a million eyes on it.
The pressure.
Yeah. And I just want to summarize what Matt's saying there. Tip for marketeers, don't let briefs come as a surprise. Get your ADC in, tell them what briefs are going to be coming towards them in the next 12 months. And maybe even share when a brief is 80 or 90% done, and maybe you've got 2 propositions or 2 messages or 2 directions you're doubting with. Invite some of the agency folk in and say, hey, I can finish it off this way or that way. Right. Briefs should be teamwork. They shouldn't be these surprises that pop up last minute.
Yeah. We had, as part of the prep, obviously, for this, so, when we're thinking about where are some of the roadblocks, so we're thinking about things like lack of training, confusing priorities, unclear language, etc. Those, when I read that, immediately it's like a lack of training. I could see that. You were just talking about, some people don't touch briefs until they're 7 years in, so to speak, right? And that speaks to how important this becomes. The one that I think that I struggle with is like when it happens is the confusing priorities. Because if there's one thing on the brief, the priority should be one of the things that's got to be buttoned down. And when it's not, I think that's where a lot of spin happens. Out of those 3, or maybe there's others, where are the biggest barriers that you see when these briefs come in? And maybe, Matt, we kick off with you on this.
And now a short word from our sponsor. This episode was sponsored by Quadical. Did I say that right? Quadical?
You did. Quadical. Yeah.
Quadical. Mark, what is it?
Well, V, I'm glad you asked. Quadical is my own company, actually. So, I'm the Sleeping Barber Podcast co-host with you, but I also have my own company. And so I'm happy to sponsor the Sleeping Barber Podcast.
Love that.
Because I give so much time to it. But Quadical is a fractional marketing leadership firm where we specialize in evidence-based marketing. And we do consulting work for companies typically between $30 to $300 million, and helping them navigate some of the challenges that people have, like, I know something's broken, but I'm not quite sure how to fix it, nor do I have the time to fix it. Fair. And so that's where we help out a lot of people.
Well, I'll speak for Mark as well, because you're wearing your Quadical hat right now. We appreciate your sponsorship of the Sleeping Barber Podcast. And for all those that may be interested, we do have a whole bunch of sponsorship options. Always looking to bring on new sponsors. We have a lot of creative ideas that can really help across a global audience.
Thanks, V.
No, thank you, Quadical. We appreciate your business.
And now back to the show.
Yeah, we spoke about alignment, so we won't go there first. I think the first thing I want to talk about is multiple strategies trying to find their way into one brief. Mm-hmm. So often we think that it is faster, easier, more cost efficient to try and do as much as we can with one brief. We want to acquire new customers. Right. We want to retain existing customers. We want to grow existing customers. But they all find their way into one brief, right? So
that's fair.
What we say is that we need to make sure that there is one strategy guiding one brief.
Yeah.
And so and as soon as we start to say that, we go, actually this might be 2 briefs. It might even be 3 briefs in some instances. Not that we want to create many more briefs, but we want to make sure that the focus of those briefs is super clear. What we say to acquire new customers might be really different to what we say to retain existing customers or grow existing customers. Sure. There might be different proof points, a different message. And so if we're trying to cram all that into one brief, it's not going to be as clear. And we're going to get that swirl from multiple stakeholders wanting different outcomes. The easiest thing is to say, we're going to write an acquisition brief, and it's going to focus us in this direction, because and it's often going to use different channels, different execution. And it's going to be a lot cheaper to talk to our existing customers. Sometimes we have their data and we can reach them in different ways. So that's the first thing, is trying to make sure that one strategy is guiding the brief.
Yeah, that's really good.
Another one is just poor strategic thinking in general. So a brief should be the summary of all the strategic thinking a brand has been doing. Yeah. So if a poor strategy is in place, or even worse, if there's no strategy in place, the brief writer is really, really going to struggle. Mm-hmm. So the brief is not a starting point. The marketing strategy is the starting point. Mm-hmm. So if the marketing strategy is bad, the brief, of course, is going to be bad. And the idea that's going to come out of it is going to be bad. And it's not going to be effective in market. And we're setting money on fire.
Yeah, we've had Roger Martin. I don't know if you know who Roger Martin is.
I love that.
Strategy. Yeah, he's great. We've had him on a couple of times talking about strategy in general. And one of the things that always comes to mind when I hear things like you just said, Pieter-Paul, is like strategies about choices. And if you don't see choices of what we're going to do and what we're not going to do, like then there's clearly not a defined strategy that everyone's agreed to before having written it down. Then you end up with this long laundry list of to-dos.
I would even add...
It becomes a choose your own adventure, right? If none of those choices are clear, it's like, oh, which way am I going to head as a brief recipient? Whether you're an internal agency person or work for an external agency, and those choices, as we know, those paths, as you go further down those paths, those choices start to branch even further. And by the time you get to an idea, you're so far from that intent of the brief writer potentially that, again, it's really hard to align in that moment.
No, this is really, I love this conversation. I'm already meandering away from like the questions, but like the reality is, when I think about a poor marketing strategy, can also be a reflection of a poor organizational strategy. Because if the org hasn't been able to say, this is identifying the place that we want to play. And if we just use like the framework that, for example, like Roger Martin uses to create strategy, you can see how this becomes a cascading or waterfall effect. Well, if now all of a sudden, like the outcome now to the agents is this briefing document, but you can probably reverse engineer that. It's like, we can tell that organizationally, you guys probably don't know which way you're going. Yeah. So how many times have you guys actually been in that moment where you've had that heart to heart with a client, be like, hey, we're missing a big chunk here that we need you to go back and try to identify for us?
Quite often. But I maybe want to flip it, Vassilis, if you don't mind. I want to focus on the situation where the strategy is strong and what the responsibilities is of the marketeer. So there's a strong business strategy in place. What happens from a brief writing perspective? So still staying within your stream of thoughts, but marketing is about making money for an organization, as I said before. Right? So as a marketeer, you need to understand how marketing can make money for the organization. And one of the key tools you have there is your brand health metrics.
Right.
How does a shift in a certain brand health metric, how does it help deliver a certain business result?
Right.
What happens if you increase awareness by 10% to the business outcomes, to sales? What happens if consideration levels or preference levels go up by 5 or 7 or 10%? What happens to sales? There's no absolute science. It's based on modeling. But when you've got the right metrics in place, when you've got the right analyst in place, we've worked with organizations, with FMCG brands and with retailers that actually have a clear handle on what they need to push. Okay, if we're gonna increase consideration for a brand by 5%, and we're going to do that by communicating message A, B, and C, then we're probably going to see an uplift of 20% contribution to sales. That's the level of understanding good marketers have on how marketing can drive business. And most agencies want to know. Most agencies want to know how their clients make money.
Yeah.
Because if an agency deeply understands that, they have a deeper understanding how they need to influence behavior and attitude through the ideas they come up with. Does it help?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And sorry, my kids are jumping upstairs. I think they're practicing their dancing. So sorry, but I just texted them, tell them to keep quiet. But totally. It's super interesting because the making money part, I think, is so critical in understanding the levers of what that is for the brand. Like profitability matters. And we joke, we always joke about profitability at the end of our podcast, but it really matters. And it's a measurement, like willingness to pay is a measurement that can be influenced. Pricing elasticity, as an example, market share. These are not like seeing X number of clicks kind of metrics. No. They're bigger business metrics that drive bigger business impact, which I think there's and B and I have talked about this a little bit before, just this lack of confidence sometimes that from marketers that we just look at the things that are in front of us, say with Google, and just don't think about some of the bigger things sometimes.
Well, I'm going to be a bit controversial there. There might be a lack of confidence. There's also a lack of understanding and a lack of focus.
Yeah.
We're getting distracted with lots of things that we shouldn't get distracted about. Right? Understand there's channel fragmentation, attention poverty. But what we need to focus on are the centers, the little pockets of excellence. So, and that's the Effies and the IPA effectiveness papers. Right? Those are sources that every marketeer should learn from, how through creativity you can make more money for your organization.
Right.
So there's lots going on in our industry and lots of award shows and lots of wonderful things. The basics of unlocking more marketing budget next year is to really understand how you can drive more business result this year. And the Effies and the IPA effectiveness papers are a great source to learn that from.
Yeah.
We also see working with some of our organizations, some of the brands we work with is marketers, and these are large organizations, right? There's hundreds of marketers, and there's multiple pockets within the business that contain different sources of information. And so the marketers have to go around and dig through the organization to find out, they might be talking to the product team, it might be talking to the research and insights team. We're finding that there is such a disconnect between what success is looks like in a brief and how it's articulated, and marketers not even understanding where that's coming from in the business. Hey, and we're in training, and the research and insights team goes, "Hey, we've got that information," and the marketer goes, "Oh, really? I didn't know." And there's just a lack of communication that's happening even within the organizations about where the sources. Most organizations, large organizations, have the information that Pieter-Paul's describing. The research and insights team will have historically an understanding of, if we move the needle on preference, on consideration, on this brand metric, we know that we're going to get more people through the door. Whatever that outcome is that you're looking for. So there's just a lack of communication, and it's causing, this lack of communication and alignment is causing a lot of wishful thinking in briefs that isn't grounded in solid business thinking.
Right.
Yeah. I want to jump a little bit from the brief part to the ideas part, if you don't mind, because there's tons of great evidence that you've talked about, Pieter-Paul, with the IPA and the Effies and all that. There's lots and lots of great evidence. One of the ones that always comes to mind is the idea with that Paul Dyson published with Kantar around the ad profitability multipliers of different things. Brand size, number one. Creativity, surprisingly, when I first read it, number two. And compared to what marketers thought, creativity is actually much further down on the top 10 list than the number two position. And so creativity, in order for it to be really effective and drive profitability, I think part of it is that you need a good idea. And so the briefing process is really important in getting a good idea. But as a starting point, one of the things that V and I joke around all the time about is you get into situations where you pitch an idea and you've got somebody in the executive team that says, "I don't like it. I don't know how to describe it, but I'll know a good idea when I see it." And then you're just left with throwing darts against the wall kind of thing. So from a good idea side of the conversation, do you have any comments or thoughts about that kind of a feedback?
Yes. So it's very easy for everyone and anyone to have an opinion on creative ideas. You can ask your neighbors, you can ask your kids that are dancing upstairs. Everybody and anybody can have an opinion on ideas.
Yeah.
It doesn't make that opinion professional, or it doesn't make that feedback constructive. It is much harder for us to have an opinion on the cybersecurity strategy of your organization. Right? Not everybody can have an opinion on that. But everybody can have an opinion on what we do. But that doesn't make that opinion or that feedback constructive and useful. And that goes back to training, right? We know that from the research that we've done, that hardly anybody has been trained in how to manage ideas. Ideas are really fragile things. They die very quickly before they are analyzed or assessed properly. They need to be managed with care. They need to be evaluated professionally, and that's not happening often enough.
Yeah, we know from the research, and thank you for refocusing our attention, Mark, because we can get stuck on briefs. We can talk about briefs for ages, but ideas are just as important, right? So we know that only 10% of organizations, based on our latest round of research, have criteria or a framework in place, a formalized criteria or framework in place to assess creativity objectively. So that means you look at 9 out of 10 organizations, they assess each idea on its individual merits without an alignment or an understanding of the creative ambition of that organization. That becomes really difficult because then you're starting to herd sheep. And I know a bit about herding sheep because I've got some on the farm here, but there is a time when we need to talk about creativity. We need to set guardrails for what sort of idea is right for our business and our brand. What is our risk appetite? What sort of ideas do we want to make? Let's have a conversation with our agencies. What is right for us? What is wrong for us? Where do we want to stay away from? Where do we want to lean into? What constraints or conventions of the category are we looking to disrupt? We don't want to disrupt everything because then we become irrelevant to our target audience. So understanding what you want to break, what you want to push against becomes important. And not enough organizations have thought like this. And so through the research, we've been able to, and it seems fairly straightforward, but how to get to more impactful creative starts with understanding what sort of criteria you're using to evaluate that creativity. We asked marketers and agencies, we asked all these people what their personal criteria was when they looked at ideas. Is it engaging for the target audience, first and foremost? Not us, not our personal opinion. There's a great quote from the chairman of Lever Fabergé when there was some really misogynistic, actually, work for Axe deodorant in the market at the time. But he said, I hate it, but I'm sure it will be very successful. He realized he wasn't the target audience. Yeah. And that's a really mature way to approach creativity. So that's the first point. We are not the target audience. So how do we come at it from their perspective? Will it earn their attention? We know that they are bombarded with so much stimulus and so much advertising. I think Forbes puts it at 4,000 to 6,000 pieces of creativity a day. Something ridiculous. How do we stand out from that? How do we earn their attention? Is the idea good enough to do that? Is the brand integral to the story? Is it well branded, this communication, whatever form it takes, whether it's audio, visual, whatever it is the branding coming through strongly? Will attribution be delivered against who we are? And is the work on brief? So there's criteria coming through the study that will help us find what impactful work is for us. And we just need to add our own organizational layer to that, right? What is important for us as an organization, beyond these basics?
Yeah. I know it when I see it. It's wrong for so many reasons, right?
Yeah.
The reason that Matt just gave you, that person is providing an opinion and feedback from their own personal perspective. They're not their target audience. We need to think what's right for the brand, what's right for the brief. And when I see it, the last bit of that sentence, that's not right. It's about what the brief is asking for. So bring the brief into the evaluation phase. It should be right in front of you when the ideas show up. And by the way, are you just some senior that's interested in the creative ideas and you weren't part of the brief writing process? Because the person who approved the brief should be the person that approves the idea.
Oh, that's a good idea. It's so simple, but it's true.
Ding, 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 ding. Yes. So on your website, and I'm going to tie this back to ideas, even though originally we were kind of trying to position it around like the BetterBriefs, but you had $350 billion of global ad spend is set to go to waste due to poor briefs, right? Now, if we flip that and say, well, what is the cost of a bad brief when it comes to turning a great idea into reality? Because I think at the end of the day, the outcome that we're all looking for is not only award-winning work, it's the objectives and the outcomes that are usually outlined. That's what we want. But when that's not done, what is that cost that actually a lot of clients won't see because they're maybe their heads in the sand or they're choosing not to look at it? There's often times where we go and report back performance on campaigns and we're looking at each other like, what data helps us tell the story better? Without just sticking to some of the hardcore facts, like did it actually drive orders? Did it add? Did it do the leads? Did it do what it was supposed to do? Instead of hiding behind these like shadow metrics, if you will. Oh, look, affinity went up. Or, anyways, I don't want to But anyways, there's a cost there. And I'd love for you guys to talk about that. Maybe start with you, Pieter-Paul.
Yeah. We coded over, I think it was 1,800 open-ended responses that allowed us to prove something that most of us already know, a negative chain reaction that a poor brief actually sets off. And what we found was that there is a human cost as well. So when a poor brief enters the system, it will deliver, it won't deliver that springboard that I mentioned before. Agencies don't actually know where to go. They come back with a wide range of ideas rather than going deep on a specific area. And we go through extra rounds. Go again. Can I see something else, please? There's not just a cost, a financial cost there, and a time cost there, but there's a human cost there. Mm-hmm. There's a human cost where we start to get annoyed. We start to get annoyed with our agency or with our client. We start to get annoyed with our team. And if this goes on and on and on, this can lead to a breakage between a client and an agency. It can lose, and it can also lead to talent loss. Mm-hmm. We are seeing an exodus of people leaving agencies and marketing altogether. Mm-hmm. Because we're so confused, because there is so much time spent on trying to clear up confusion. So not only is there a hard cost, it is a scary hard cost when you think about it. Ad spend 2025 is forecasted by work to be surpassing $1 trillion this year. So our study found that when you deliver a poor brief, we ask people to estimate what's the percentage of your marketing budget going to waste due to poor briefs. Mm-hmm. And we're really surprised about this finding. People all over the world were super, super aligned. Agencies thought it was 37%, marketeers thought it was 30%.
Wow.
So the total sample thinks it's 33%. We're talking to you guys from the US. US marketeers think it's 33%. So we'll just let that hang for a while. 1 trillion, take 33% of 1 trillion, that's going to waste. Mm-hmm. Or take 1/3 of your own marketing budget, that is going to waste due to poor briefs and misdirected work. Mm-hmm. But now think about the opportunity. Yeah. If we invest more in training, in understanding, in clearing up the language we use with our agencies, if we give them a heads up, if we don't let briefs come as a surprise, if we establish clear criteria that Matt was talking about before around what the right ideas are for our organization, then all of a sudden we can have up to 1/3 more budget. We can make that budget work a lot harder.
Something like this just came up, and it was right around the time when I was watching the webinar that you guys had given on the Better Ideas project. So the scenario was that the client was like, we're burning a lot of time going back and forth on the brief and trying to get a piece of creative out. Like, how do we fix this? And then suddenly I was watching this webinar that you were giving, and there was a bit of evidence there that from your position on the rework component. Matt, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's lots of rework happening on both sides. So the research showed the rework that's happening when it comes to getting to a signed off and final idea. So we're going through 5 rounds of revisions. Once we brief in an agency, they're coming back 5 times before we actually put a green tick against that idea. So, and we know that's gone up. So 2007, the IPA measured the same statement, and it was 3 rounds. So we know that in 18 years, it's gone up another 2 rounds. Mm-hmm. So for us, that's mind-boggling. We're spending 5 rounds of rework to get to ideas that we're kind of not as happy with as we once were. So we're asking our agencies to go again and again and again. And a lot of that, it's a symptom of a lack of alignment, again, internally. And so the swirl that happens internally, we've worked with some organizations where they go through a number of rounds, even higher than 5, to get to a signed off and approved brief. And what that is doing is often putting a straitjacket in front of the agency as well, saying, hey, we've got this brief so tight and so perfected that there's no room for creativity once it actually gets to the agency. In this instance, the creative ideas were being assessed against the creative brief that the agency was writing, not even the marketing brief that the client was writing. So they were spending all this time getting to an approved brief internally inside their marketing organization and then judging the work against the brief the agency was writing. And so there was all this 3 months being wasted once you sort of put a time figure on that. So it's tricky. There's lots of swirl happening marketing side, and then that's creating a lot of rework and confusion when it gets to the agencies as well.
Practical tip from Matt there. Make sure that you and your agency are clear on which brief is being used to evaluate the work again.
That's a great point.
You boys are laughing, but you'll find evidence that there is a lot of confusion. Marketeers showing up with their brief, agencies showing up with their brief, and confusion again.
Yeah.
I used to work with a great CMO. This was years ago, and he used to make a point of walking in with the brief, and looking at everyone else, saying, has everyone else got the brief on their desk? Which brief have you got on your desk? Are we all aligned on which brief we're using? And he used to make it a thing because he understood the problematic nature of having two separate briefs, and some clients having two briefs in front of them in agencies as well. So again, understanding which one, and it's up to each individual relationship. We can't say there is a right answer to that because some agencies don't want to share their briefs. That's an internal document that fosters creativity in their own way, and they don't want to share that with the client. In those instances, they have to be held accountable to the brief that the client sends them. But other instances, it's different depending on the relationship.
I love. It feels like we keep coming back to the quality, in this artifact and how we're continuing to build that, and we'll make this a kind of a quicker question. Maybe it's a softball question, but it's when we think about what are those key elements that of that brief, if you will, that make it useful as not only from a benchmark perspective, but also from an idea evaluation state as well. Maybe Pieter-Paul, maybe you want to kick us off there.
Yeah. So we ask people, what's the most important component of a brief? What's the most important element of a brief? And what came back was that the objective section is by far the most important element to get right. Not just for marketeers, but even more so for agencies. Agencies are screaming for a clear picture of success.
Yeah.
So when you're a marketeer and you're trying to fine craft this beautiful message, don't. Write a single-minded message that's straightforward and slightly boring, that provides a good springboard. Really focus on the picture of success, on the objective section.
Yeah. It's funny.
Simple, right?
Coming back to this, what you said at the beginning, Pieter-Paul and Matt, I think you agree. I mean, the brief is arguably the most important document in marketing. And without a really good brief, it's harder. You just stack the chips against yourself because it's harder to get to a good idea because there's lack of clarity and there's a lack of evaluation techniques and that kind of stuff. But then, as you were talking about, it multiplies going down the cascade because then you've got campaigns that
totally
need creative consistency, as we found out in other research, like that build over time. But if you don't have a good idea, then you don't benefit from the compounding effects of good creative and good ideas. And then you're switching out creative all the time and you're switching out creative platforms. And it just becomes this like cascading effect that like what started really small eventually becomes a really big issue. Yeah. It's crazy.
There are some amazing quotes from some really well-regarded people in the Better Ideas report that we've just launched. These are agency leaders from some amazing agencies and marketing leaders from some amazing brands, and they talk about the nature of the relationship and the partnership they share together. So strategy is one thing, articulating that strategy and transferring that strategy so an agency understands, because agencies, they're creative folk. They don't always get what you're trying to do all the time. So communication becomes really important. And we can only echo how partnership and relationship can bring you some amazing results. I don't think any Effies that we won or any awards or accolades that have been fortunate enough to come our way have come off the first brief that we've ever received from a client. Never. It's always been years. It's been a journey and a roadmap to get us from where we are today to some really effective work. And so never from the first brief. I can't none that come to mind, Pieter-Paul. Anyway, maybe you've got a different opinion there, but it is working together. It's understanding what your shared ambition is when it comes to how you want to put your brand in the world, and what is the right approach for your brand and your marketing team.
I think that the compounding effect that you talk about, Mark, there is interesting. Just let's take the whole thing out of our category.
Mm-hmm.
Think about dangerous topic. Let's not talk about the US president. Let's talk about a president. Let's make it neutral.
Let's not.
So a president is briefing the press. Now, if that president is a bit off with his briefing, man, it's going to explode in the wrong direction. Or let's talk about the military. If the military gets their briefs wrong,
from signal,
when they're going into enemy territory, where they're probably going to encounter lots of unexpected events that will happen and circumstances and things coming their way, kind of like a nice thing that happens in the market as well, right? Marketplace is an unexpected place. The battlefield is an unexpected place. The cost and the compounding effects of a poor brief in the military or a poor brief by a president are huge, are gigantic, will lead to lots of scrutiny and potential human loss. They get it right. But because maybe we don't see ideas enough as a vehicle, we don't see great creative thinking and creativity as a vehicle to drive commercial effects, we don't treat it with respect enough. We don't invest in training enough. Just to go back to what Vassilis was saying about training before, when was the last time you boarded an airplane where the pilot had not gone to flight school? When's the last time you visited a doctor? When's the last time you visited a doctor that didn't go to medical school?
Yeah.
Or when's the last time you went to the barber and you sat down and said, you know what? Start cutting, and I'll know it when I'll see it.
I love that. I love that. The visual is just amazing. I'll know it when I see it. So, sorry, go ahead, Mark. Go.
Well, no, because I wanted to, it's such an important point. I mean, there's very few.
Totally.
My wife's an accountant, and she has to keep up with credits all the time for maintaining her designation and that kind of stuff, where marketers often don't have that. And I know that you guys have obviously built a business around a lot of the training and the requirements and insights you've been telling us about. But from a training perspective, I want to maybe V, you can ask as well about some of the specific things. But where do you? Well, obviously, you guys would be a great place to start. But what are some of the things that you see as really important needs within the briefing process or within the creative idea process, and how do you communicate that? Because it seems in some ways foreign, just because it's not something we normally get trained on.
Not anymore. So in the olden days. Mark.
Olden days.
No idea. Where's this going, Pieter-Paul?
10, 15, 20 years ago, my strategic director took more time to teach me stuff. There was more time for where marketeers explained to agencies what their plans were. There was more time to talk about what success looked like. There was more time. I remember being trained by a big global drinks brand for 2 days. 2 days on how they were going to brief us and how they would evaluate our ideas. Those 2 days were crucial for us to understand what was coming our way and how they were going to assess our thinking. It establishes shared language between brand and agency. Time was invested in that. And maybe this is a personal observation, and maybe Matt can make it a bit more tangible in a second, but my observation is that we are trying to do so many things that are immediate and urgent, and we don't take the time to really educate the next generation, and we don't invest the time to really understand each other, how we can get to greater ideas that deliver commercial effects. Because it's a partnership, right? It's a partnership between marketeers and agencies that will deliver the great ideas. It is not a baton pass. That's the worst thing, how you can think about it.
I love what you're saying there, Pieter-Paul. I don't know, Matt, if you wanted to top up on that before I go my next question.
No, go for it.
No, so like the one thing that, and this is kind of dates back a little, not dates too far back, but working on the consulting side, agile has become a big thing, right? It's synonymous with efficiency. It's obviously been deep rooted in a lot of like on the tech side of things. And of course, there was a shift to getting into agile marketing.
And now vibe marketing.
Right. We found that out a couple of weeks ago or whatever. But this whole notion about moving with pace, iterating on the fly. I was always a big believer. Like, I don't believe that's how marketing can thrive. There's elements of it. Don't get me wrong. If, I think we have joked as we were kind of onboarding, like, I'm a performance marketer, so to speak. And I know it's like not something we ever want to talk about, but testing, evolving, it works in that setting. But when we think about briefs, trying to set up campaign strategy, marketing strategy, those things can't really happen iteratively or with too much speed. You need to have a thought process behind it. And maybe this is a byproduct of how we're currently operating with more speed than ever before, that now we can't write good briefs because we feel like we can just iterate on the fly and get there when we get there. And I think your example, Pieter-Paul, of like sitting down, telling the barber, here, go at it, I'll tell you when to stop, really, really doesn't work. So my question here is like, how do we almost put a pause on this and say, here's how we have to come back to accelerate once more?
I think it's a great point, and maybe bringing together what Marc was talking about as well. I think there are three things. There's skills, tools, and processes. Right? They're the three ingredients that will make for a successful transfer of information, a successful method of getting to great creativity that has an impact, right? So skills, we all know that we can do a bit better in our brief writing skills. We can always be brushing those up. We can be sharpening and training that muscle often, regularly, not just through formal training, but analyzing work from our competitors, unpacking that, understanding what's happening. Tools, having great tools in place, whether it's creative evaluation criteria, framework, a template, a unified template. I can't tell you how often we've been into organizations and there are 17 different templates, brief templates. Every department seems to have a different template. The performance has a different template to the brand departments. There should be one template. The strategic core across all initiatives should be the same. And yes, the ask and the practicalities are different because you're asking different specialists to deliver different things, but the strategic core should be the same. So tools are really important. And then processes. Processes need to be, we need to move quickly. Just to think that we don't, we don't always have the luxury of having really long lead times on our products, or we don't have the luxury of knowing when a new product is going to come to the market like some organizations do. Some organizations work on products 6 months, 12 months. They know it's coming. They've got time to work through that. Sometimes we need to work iteratively. What I'd suggest is that we pull elements out of the brief. So whether it's the problem or the opportunity statement, have a quick stand-up meeting, 15-minute meeting. Do we have the right problem articulated? If so, great, move forward, keep moving. Next meeting, do we have the right measures of success articulated? If not, let's get those crafted. So just putting a brief on the table and trying to get alignment around a brief is really difficult, but how do we deconstruct it to the core elements and
That's really interesting.
Can we get alignment quickly on this and this and this so we can keep moving quickly with certainty with the choices made?
Yeah.
And just to add to that, right? Before you can get people to focus on those three things, I think we need to have a hard stop. I think we need to have a reset. Because I believe that, personal opinion, warning, but most creative work doesn't work. We're operating on the idea that everything we put out there is working. What if you flip that? we must flip it. Most of the stuff we put out there isn't working. The vast majority of comms is not working, is getting ignored. There's plenty of stats out there that suggest that that's true. You can also go into your own brain and think about what ads, what comms do I remember from last week that weren't related to my category, because we're all overthinking as marketeers.
Yeah.
In our latest study, we found that both marketeers and agencies agree that most creative work doesn't even stand out. I think we need to have a real hard stop and look into the mirror and say, most people are ignoring advertising. Most people are ignoring comms. There's only a handful of stuff that actually stands out. And if you start to think like that, you start to make bolder choices and you start to make more effective work. Sorry, I just wanted to add that because you know it's a good point.
Yeah, and I wanted to come back to something that I think you mentioned, Pieter-Paul, but maybe Matt, you can touch on this a bit. Is the human component as well? Because the cost, we've estimated some numbers on actual cost of production and the actual waste on the media side and that kind of thing. But just to come back to that, like there's some stats on the Better Ideas Project around how proud people feel or how valued they feel, and there's like just the human component of doing good work and feeling like you're making a contribution. And maybe if you don't mind, just Matt talking about that a little bit.
Yeah, to provide some context to your listeners, there is in that stat we said marketers, agencies, and we also break it down by in-house teams as well, because through the research we've got some really good splits on different elements. But we asked them how proud they were of the work they'd made across their career. So looking back historically, what percentage of the work are you proud of? And it's 36%, I think, of the work the marketers are proud of across their career. It drops down to about 26% from memory for agencies. So roughly a third or a quarter, when we look back at all the work, is stuff that we're proud of making. If I was a furniture maker or I had some other profession and I looked at all the tables that I've made across my career and was only prouder of a quarter of them, I'd want to change careers pretty quickly. So I'd suggest that maybe there's something wrong with me as a furniture maker, right? Am I not doing a good job in what I'm doing? So I'd want to find somewhere else to apply my trade or my skills or my passion. So it's really tricky. I can't think of another industry where pride in what we make is so low.
Yeah, to me, I think there's a bit of a sense of optimism there. I think when you can do things about fixing the process and you can do things about getting better feedback on what makes a good idea, I think you have a better chance of having that work environment where people are in more of a flow state, where they're more engaged, they're more challenged, they're like more excited, more proud, all those things. And to me, there's like a positive outcome here that a little bit of training might actually make a major difference. If we talked about that waterfall effect earlier.
Absolutely. Training. And we also found that marketers who inspire their agencies, they empower their agencies with what great creative looks like. They understand the creative ambition. They have a sense of what their creative agency needs to get their job done. They're 3 times prouder of the work they make. So just by inspiring your agency, setting them off in the right direction, allowing them the freedom to do the work that they're designed to do, we're 3 times prouder of the work that we make. So you're absolutely right. There is a positive outcome, and there should be light at the end of the tunnel there. I went to a dark place pretty quickly, but there's definitely a lot of room for improvement, but there's optimism there as well.
So, Marc and Vassilis, we started the BetterBriefs project originally with a foolish and big ambition to literally help reduce the large amount of pull briefs in the world. And that hasn't changed. The reason why we have published these 2 reports is to literally start conversations.
Right.
It's not easy to start a conversation in your marketing team to say, hey, we're pretty shit at generating ideas, aren't we? Or we're pretty shit at writing grids. That's not going to go down well with your CMO when you're
no.
So that's why we've produced these stats. We were blown away by them, but use them as conversation starters, because it is poor everywhere. Hey, look at the poor state of briefs and idea evaluation on a global level.
Yeah.
Is there something we could be doing better? So after doing the BetterBriefs project, naturally throughout our career, we've observed so many poor situations where ideas died way too quickly, and we wanted to do something about it. So just wanted to add that why we're doing this stuff. It comes from a place of deep passion. It comes from a place where we're seeing so much rubbish every day that our industry is producing, and how can we make that better? Because I've been an Effie and an APEC judge, an Effie APEC judge and an Effie judge in Australia for over 10 years. Mm-hmm. And when you get good creative that delivers commercial results, that's the reason why we're in this industry, right?
I agree. Mm-hmm.
When you see the great stuff at the Super Bowl that works, that's the joy. That's what you want to do. That makes you feel proud of the work you're doing. So let's find our ways back to that.
Mm-hmm. I know we're coming really close on time. I want to sneak in one more quick question here, if it's okay. What's the role of AI coming into this whole ecosystem? Is it, just more garbage going in, spitting out more garbage on the other side, or do you seeing it as being a tool to actually help marketers accelerate the adoption of a better briefing process?
Yeah. So AI can definitely help you with components of the brief.
Okay.
It won't write the brief for you.
No.
So a brief is a puzzle. You still need a trained and skilled marketeer to make those decisions because there's too many dimensions going on. But for elements of the brief, definitely use AI. Definitely use AI to get a deeper understanding of your target audience, to filter through lots of data sets and find relationships, for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely use AI to check if your message is single-minded. Mm-hmm. For sure. Don't get AI to write the brief for you.
No, I remember as a strategist working in agencies, I always found writing that message or the proposition a really challenging thing, and sometimes you'd find yourself in a bit of a rabbit hole, and it would have been great to have a tool at that point to just expand your thinking a little bit. Hey, come at it from this perspective, try and just broaden your mind a little bit, and leave the choice to you. Obviously, you're the one making the decisions, but get it to push the boundaries a little bit, push into spaces you haven't necessarily thought about. It is great. It's a great tool.
Matt and Pieter-Paul, this has been awesome. How can people find out more about you and the courses you offer and just research that you've been doing, all those things?
Start with going to betterbriefs.com, where you'll find the Better Briefs and the Better Ideas report. Start a better conversation in your organization. Then you also find wonderful courses there on brief writing and on idea assessment. There's also a best practice guide on how to get a better briefs sitting on our site at betterbriefs.com. We've co-authored it with Mark Ritson. So he shared his thinking there. Mark Ritson is a marketing professor, and he trains people in marketing strategy. Yeah. And lots of other tools and tricks and thinking, all sitting on Better Briefs, there to help you all. That's why we're doing this. It's there to help everyone. Matt?
No, I would echo that. And if you need specific help for your brand, just reach out. There's lots of different formats our training takes, so I'm sure there's something right for you as well.
Awesome.
What a great conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, gents. It was, awesome.
Yeah, our pleasure.
If you like this show, please leave a review. And even if you didn't, we'd love to make this show better, and your feedback will help us do that. It is the post pod for the Better Briefs and the Better Ideas project.
That's right.
It's going to be great. I've
great.
Already got better ideas. I'm already feeling like I'm
jacket, man.
Yeah, that was a really good idea this morning.
You look smart.
Well, let's the jacket fool you then.
That's okay. You do what you do. And I felt so intimidated, everyone. When I joined the stream originally, I saw Marc all suited up. It's got collars and everything. I had to
collars, buttons.
So I'm like, I just threw on a jacket just to kind of like help with it. So those that are just listening, head over to YouTube page to check out like our what is it? Our fit check. Is that a thing the kids say?
Yeah, I don't
fit
know.
Check, maybe.
Oh, that's I like it.
Anyways,
Gotta get a clothing sponsor.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Matt and Pieter-Paul.
What a great conversation, eh?
Yeah. Look, I know. Why don't you go first? There's a few things that we were just chatting about.
Yeah, so I think like going through back our shared notes and whatnot, and of course, like I think it's easiest for me to compartmentalize. Okay, what are the three or four themes? And so like there were the three themes that I think we agreed on. The first was the importance of the brief. The second was creative effectiveness and the business impact that it has. Third was the collaboration and process. So the first one for me, I think we can kick off with is importance of the brief.
Yeah. Yeah, there was that. It was almost a punchline that we talked about, where I think it was something like 90% of marketers think they're awesome at writing the briefs, and about 10% of their agencies agree. It shows there's just a big gap, between, and we've all been in. A lot of us have been in both positions of being the brief writer and also the brief acceptor. It's a hard thing to do, and it's a hard thing to do well. And you can see why there's so many competing interests within the organization, so many things changing, so many voices to sort of incorporate into a brief from inside the organization, a lot of stakeholder opinions. And so it's no wonder that the agency side looks at this and goes, what? What are you trying to do here?
Yeah.
So I appreciate the challenge of it to begin with.
Yeah. There was one thing, I don't remember if it was Matt or Pieter-Paul that said this, but a brief that isn't treated like a contract is designed to fail.
Yeah.
And I think like when you start thinking about it in that context, you start really appreciating the rigor that needs to go into this document. And I think you and I have talked about this time and time again, about it being one of the most important artifacts that we have. But I don't think many of us think about it as a term as like almost like a contract that you're creating with your creative agency, your media agency, whatever the case may be, right?
Totally.
And I think we shouldn't be overlooking the importance of that.
Well, totally. And then, and we'll talk about this again later, but when it comes to the better ideas part of of their two reports, I mean, looking back at the brief as a form of an evaluation tool to see how well the creative idea executes against the strategic brief. I think you're 100% right. Like when you think about that as a contract, it changes a little bit because whenever we have a contract, it's almost like a scope of work. You go, okay, well,
totally.
Here's the things that I said I was going to do. Here's the things that you said you would deliver on, and did you do that? And so, without the idea of the brief being a contract, it kind of loses its or misses the opportunity to create more value.
Yeah, I completely agree. Before we move to creative effectiveness and business impact, the one last thing for me on the importance of the brief is a poor brief can also lead to that significant financial and human cost as well. Like, repeat executions or iterations, sometimes more than you should be doing. That's usually rooted into likely a poor brief, or internally, if those of us on the client side, poor alignment across our internal stakeholders.
Totally. Yeah, that's a really good point. What do you think about the rework component? I mean, I think he said there at one point there was 3 steps in the approval process. And now there's 5, but I think the extra parts were, if I'm just going from memory, but I think the extra parts were largely due to rework.
Yeah. It honestly, I think it just comes back to, and listen, it's to no fault of any advertiser out there. We know that something like marketing sometimes can be very difficult to get full approval on across all stakeholders at a moment, or even like the approach. Like, it's one of the hardest things to do when we're meant to move with speed and be somewhat agile and whatnot. Sometimes the organization itself doesn't allow us to do that at the speed that we may want to operate in.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that it's gone from 3 to 5 does not surprise me from an internal approver process. I think from our perspective is we have to kind of make sure that we're bringing them along throughout the process to make sure when it is time to sign off that it's not the first time they're seeing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've seen some of the iterations, and I know we always want to be really polished when we're presenting, but sometimes showcasing or kind of pulling back that curtain on the iterative work
Mm-hmm.
may help reduce that barrier as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have thoughts on that, on what you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, there's that part where they talked about how to give feedback on ideas and sort of a creative, I don't want to call it a template, but I keep thinking about, we had Karen on talking about Rethink's model of this. And so they use crafts as a way to evaluate creative ideas. I know Dan White's published something that's really, I've used it in the past. It's super helpful.
Yeah.
But it's having some form of structure in the kind of feedback you want to let people know feedback is great. Here's how we would like it, because this is the most productive way for us to use feedback as opposed to I don't like it. Pieter-Paul had a great line about, imagine going to your barber and saying, just keep cutting and I'll know it when I see it.
I love that line. I love it. I see it.
But I think that is so important, like to have that. I mean, for lack of a better word, the structure of the feedback, because to get a really good idea, it does need to go through iteration, and it gets better. It can get better if there's productive feedback, but it can also quickly get worse and boring and dull and all those kinds of things if you're just constantly trying to shape this idea around, I'll know it when I see it.
Yeah. That was such a great line.
Yeah.
Okay. Shifting gears, creative effectiveness and business impact. I isolated 3 counterpoints there, or not really counterpoints, but 3 things. The first one for me was we need to understand how marketing can make money for organizations. Creative and effectiveness as a principle, I think we've talked about it with a few different guests over the course of 4 years. But we need to start rerouting or kind of being really thoughtful in that process when it comes to creative execution. And I know we're getting pushed by publishers alike that's just like volume versus quality. And I feel like that's where we as advertisers would be like, wait a second. No, we have to start putting the quality in first and then create volume as an extension of that, not the other way around.
Yeah. It's funny enough. The reason I'm dressed up, I'm giving a keynote today. And so part of the topic is business is the new stupid, which is an idea I totally blatantly stole from our friends at Capero.
Good people.
Yeah, we should get them back on soon.
Yeah, we should.
Anyway, the idea there that they had was like, there's so many more media channels, and that they're all pushing us towards, more and more personalization, which, and you and I both know, I mean, there are so many different formats of ads. Yeah. You can make yourself crazy and super busy.
Yes.
Just producing versions of an asset.
Yeah.
And then if you just take a step back and you think of like, what are we actually doing?
Yeah.
Those costs, the cost to all those versioning and formats and stuff isn't free unless you're using AI generated stuff and maybe all that kind of stuff. But you kind of lose sight of what the objective is, I think, in a lot of cases. And so the creative effectiveness component, there's a great example that I also stole from James Herman. If you remember the Volvo's epic splits with Van Damme.
Yes. Yeah.
Has like a single idea and a really well executed campaign without 800 different versions, and had massive impact on Volvo B2B truck sales.
Yeah.
Because people paid attention, and all kinds of people paid attention, including all of the buyers in the buying committee. And like, I think, that's something we can get caught up in, is the trees and not the forest.
100%.
that idea of mass personalization, we can measure everything. We can go down to the single individual click that drives this transaction. And it rarely actually is that way. So I think when we step back and think about creative ideas, there's this whole notion of optimizing for the whole that is sometimes lost. That is also really important to include in the creative brief, so you don't get caught up in what's the metric that we're going to optimize this campaign for on this channel, and what about this channel, and what about this channel?
Totally. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think when it comes down to it is understand where consumers expect personalization.
Yeah.
Right? And they don't expect it on their connected TV or their TV. That's not where you expect. But if you're, an SMS, better be personalized. My phone number. Email, better be personalized. You have my email. I've given you access to that information, in both instances. So I think understanding where personalization consumers expect to see it versus just being forced because MarTech vendors, ad tech vendors are telling you that, 45%. Okay, I'm sorry. This is going to be a wrong stat because I don't remember. But I remember seeing stats to the effect of X amount of percentage people would prefer to click on an ad if it was personalized, right? I don't know what that X was, but that for me is a little bit like in the open web. Don't really expect that, nor do I want to see it because that becomes creepy.
Yeah, that also. I mean, there's a whole can of worms that we should actually talk about this at some point. But
we probably should.
The targeting component, it makes you believe that you can target everybody the way that you just described it, which is how you get to the personalization process, which is how I think, you think back a few steps, and then which is why you want to create 800 versions of a piece of creative. In reality is I really don't know. I'm not confident. Let's put it that way. I'm not confident in our ability to target the people that we think we're targeting.
Oh, I'm with you, man.
In any meaningful way. Like, there's some things that we can do, like contextual targeting, as it turns out, is actually superior in a lot of ways than persona-based targeting. And there's published reports around that. And when you hear about things like that, you're like, well, why is that? Like, if the tech was really good, it should know everything.
Yeah, but it isn't.
But it's now saying, well, if you show your ad in the sports page, the equivalent of a sports page, then you're probably going to get sports-minded people.
Totally.
So what are we doing again? Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. All right, last one, collaboration and process. I think for me, this one here was just how do you make sure you limit the amount of rework due to that misalignment, which can stifle not only creativity, it can all of a sudden become a project that everyone's excited about. All of a sudden be like, oh, we're still talking about this?
Yeah.
Why is this still a thing?
Yeah.
Someone just kill it already. And we've all seen those projects, right?
Totally. Well, we've all been in those projects too, I think, where we're just exhausted.
Yeah.
and just feeling demoralized and all those things because, it's almost a form of learned helplessness. Like the idea that, oh, well, I'll put forward a good idea, but everyone's going to whittle it down anyway.
That's right.
Why bother?
Why even bother?
Yeah. And so to have people excited, to have people passionate, to get the most out of them, I think often like you want to try and keep people in a state of like a flow state.
100%.
As much as you can. And so the more you push people away from that, the more apathetic they become, the less you actually get from them in terms of an outcome or an output.
Totally. And again, collaboration between teams, that's internal stakeholders, your agencies, can enhance the quality of work.
Yeah.
But don't drag it on to the point where it now becomes a chore.
Yeah.
You don't have an infinite amount of time from the moment a brief is kicked off in a traditional context of like a campaign. I'm not talking about some longer leading strategies and things to that effect, but you don't have a lot of time where you can capitalize on that enthusiasm on this, this new project, this new thing of going to market with, or whatever it may be. And we want to make sure that you're bringing everybody along. You're bringing the best out of every single one to ensure that the output is going to be something everyone's really proud of.
For sure.
Because if you're really proud of the media side, I'm really proud of the creative side, all of a sudden it creates this incredible environment that everyone wants to be a part of, you know, and to celebrate it.
Totally. Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah, it was I'm with you. That was such an interesting conversation. And so for the, as we talked about before, for the importance of a brief and the briefing process and the value an organization can get out of having a really good idea. It's amazing that it hasn't been something that has been talked about more since these guys, I feel like, since these guys started the projects that they've been working on, the research they've been working on. I don't remember anybody really talking about it that much, but it's almost like that pivot point of where strategy meets like execution, where the rubber meets the road, or whatever phrase you want to use.
Yeah.
But the brief is like the hinge point that converts all this inertia into action. And it's so important to get it right.
I completely agree.
Well, now that we look so good and that we both agree, V.
Right?
Yeah. I think that's all we got for today.
Profitability's beaming through my window.
The window. Yeah. It is. You
great.
Really look illuminated in profit. Showering in profitability there. Oh my goodness. This is great. Yeah.
Pieter-Paul and Matt, thank you once again for engaging us with your insights. Really appreciated you coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll, I'm sure, talk to you again at some point.
Probably.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. Have a great morning.
You too.
Ciao.